Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second session of day 2 of our Career Breakout Summits. My name is Ed Stanley. You may recognize me from the CoachCast podcast, which I do in conjunction with Coaching Minds. And delighted today to be coming here to talk about a topic that I'm super passionate about, which is leadership, but really stepping into leadership as a new manager. So moving from an individual contributor into leadership. So hopefully today I'll get to see a lot of either new faces or familiar faces. And if you have been to one of my kind of facilitations or workshops before, I love questions. So for me, if we don't get through the slides, that's okay if there's lots of questions, because I think the engagement piece can be really good. So if you do have questions or you're on YouTube, please send them across. I'm more than happy to jump in and say hello. So hello to Adele and Donna, and I will capture people as I move forward, and I will stop and answer some questions if I can. But today, maybe for the people who aren't aware of who I am, maybe if you allow me just to give a brief introduction. So my name is Ed Stanley. I'm based in Dublin, Ireland, and I'm a leadership and mindset coach. I've been in this space for the last 4 to 5 years, and before I I've only recently moved into higher education. So I work in an institute where we help students to bridge the gap from academia to employability. So I work in the careers and employability sector. But before that, I worked for nearly 25 years in the corporate space. And for the last 10 of that, I've worked in leadership, either senior leadership or leadership itself. And I've recently, just last August, left LinkedIn, where I was a manager and in the leadership team there. So hopefully I can share some insights, but also learn from you as we go through the next 25-30 minutes. So it will be a short session. I just do have a couple of slides to kind of help us work through what stepping into leadership looks like. And you can then follow me if you feel my content resonates with you or what I talk about resonates. You'll see my QR code just above there. So feel free to connect. I love connecting with other individuals. I love hearing people's thoughts. And I love when people challenge some of the things that I might talk about as well, because for me, that's how we grow and develop, is by challenging our own perceptions, etc. So if you allow me, I will get straight into it. So as you can see there from the first title, its leadership is from having the answers to asking better questions. So as somebody who is an individual contributor, or naturally when you move into leadership or management, it can almost come from the higher performance kind of bracket. So that's where you've really excelled as somebody great in the job that really you were an expert of. And now you're moving into a leadership role where the landscape is very different, okay? And if I'm being honest, a lot of new leaders don't always get the support that is required because they were hitting targets or they were hitting results or they're making a huge impact in the job that they were in. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will be a great people manager. And like everything in life, they need the support. And I'm a very visual person, and the way I like to kind of use an analogy is some of the best football players, if you're into football, some of the best rugby players, they don't naturally transition into leadership. And while some of the average football players or average rugby players become great managers because they understand probably more so the human side of things, the human skills, how to build relationships, how to build management skills, and they're using a lot of their different tools. So, but that's not always the case. There's always exceptions to every rule. But from my experience also working in leadership, some of the great leaders are not necessarily naturally your higher performers, but again, they can be great individual leaders as well. So today what we'll talk about is a little bit what I touched on there. So what got you here won't get you there. And that's really about looking into what kind of questions you will kind of need to handle as a new leader. So what's the difference from being recognized as a high performer to now being recognized as somebody who is there to develop their people and to help their people. So you have that coaching mentality that needs to come into play. And this can be quite challenging for individuals because, like everything in life, as human beings, when we move into something where we're feeling a little bit uncomfortable or uncertain, or we don't have that experience, we try to gravitate to the things that we were good at. So a lot of times what I'll see is new leaders who will move in and they'll start trying to help their team by answering questions, by doing the job. That's the role of the team, because that's where they may have come from. That's where they're very comfortable with. And that's okay initially, just to get yourself a bit of confidence, but you need to be careful how you balance that. And you'll hear a lot of myself saying balance, and I say balance in a lot of the coaching and mentoring work that I do, because it's important to remember that there is always a balance in this. Okay, you're not expected to step into leadership on the first day and be a leader who has a wealth of experience. That comes with challenges, it comes with situations, it comes with conversations, it comes with difficulties, and space also. So that's why I say it's good to have a support mechanism in place, and not all leaders, new leaders moving in, do have that. So how do you help yourself as you move forward? There's a couple of things to look at. So a couple of mindsets that we'll go through. I'll talk briefly about some of my experience and drop in some stories. I'd love to hear anything from people online. If you have questions or concerns, please just drop them in, or challenges, as I said. More than happy over the next 20 minutes to explore those as well. And we'll touch on the coaching habit, which is from Michael Bungay Stanier, who talks a lot about the 7 questions, but I will focus on, just due to time, and today we'll focus on the one question that I always find powerful for new leaders stepping into that space. Okay, and there's a little bit around the 7 kind of coaching habits, or the 7 powerful questions that Michael has come up with, is quite similar to the 7 levels of the deep model that you would have maybe trained in if you are a coach listening in, or you may have heard of it previously. It's just asking the same question 7 times because you're going deeper and deeper. It's like peeling back an onion. So Michael Bungay Stanier's 7 questions also kind of touches on that. But I'll bring you through what his 7 questions look like near the end of our session, but I won't be able to dive into them all. I will share some nuggets from this book. So if you're into moving into leadership, or you're of an interest in leadership or coaching, etc., this book will be one that I would highly recommend. It's a go-to for me. I've read this book probably 5, 6, 7 times, but it's one of those books that you can dip in and dip out of. So I'd encourage everybody, if you're interested in this space, to get your hands on that particular book, and again, challenge some of the things that Michael may say as well. But what we'll go through today is a little bit around the leadership trap. And this is from my personal experience moving into leadership. It's also from my time as a leadership coach, working mainly with individual contributors that have landed a promotion and moved into leadership, and maybe are finding it quite challenging or overwhelming, and some of the things that we would kind of touch on. So these are the things that we will focus on as we go through the course of today. But there's kind of 2 things that I want us to kind of look at. And I don't really like always comparing, but in this situation, it's just a good visual to give you an idea of what that actually looks like for you as an individual. And that's the hero leader versus the coaching leader. So as I said, kind of when I started to open up this conversation, there's a lot around the hero leader, and it's easier maybe to gravitate into that space as a new leader, right? So you feel that you're making a contribution, or your value is rewarded, because you're able to maybe solve certain problems. You might be able to give all the answers to the queries because you may have worked in the job that individual had been doing, and you were a high performer or that area. But there is some consequences of being that hero leader, and I've called out just 4 of them just to emphasize some of this kind of some of the issues that you may encounter. And these are some of the traps that I do see new leaders falling into. And putting my hands up, I did fall into these traps as well as a new leader, because naturally, as I said, we will gravitate to stuff that we feel like that we can fix. And if you come from a corporate, a tech, a pharma tech, a fintech environment, or any particular environment, your mindset can be kind of ring fenced into thinking about solutions, because everything is solution focused. But when you move into leadership, there is a big focus on solutions, but it's not necessarily the first question you go to, because as a leader, you also have a duty of care to help that person to grow and develop. So these are the things that we will look at in this particular section. So the hero leader, some of the things that they fall down on is what I've kind of mentioned. They solve every problem. They give all the answers. They become the bottleneck without actually realizing they're becoming the bottleneck, because they become almost a crutch for an individual. And individuals, if they're under pressure and they are firefighting, or they need a response quickly, if they're on phones or if they're on social media and they're tracked on their time, it can be easier to just go to the person that can give them the answer there and then, rather than you asking questions or them searching for that, which will set them up in the medium to long term better. But sometimes they're only thinking about the short term. So you need to change your mindset and shift away from just short term thinking. Even though there will be pressures from the job and from the business, it's about understanding when you make those challenges, okay? And then also, unfortunately, a consequence of you stepping in and helping and solving can become what I talked about, the crutch, right? Your team can come dependent on you, and that can be unintentional. Sometimes new leaders don't actually realize that they're micromanaging in that moment. They feel like they're being helpful, they're being resourceful, they're really stepping up and really helping their team. And in the short term, it may look like that because the results might look good. Whatever your KPIs are might look really well. Your team are happy because you're helping them to solve kind of difficult queries and questions. But your job isn't that anymore. Your job is to manage and lead, and they can bring different types of skill sets that are needed. Okay. So again, if anybody has any questions, please jump in and ask. More than happy to see if I can answer anything as we go along. But we will continue with maybe looking then on the other side of the leadership trap. And as you can see, it's in green. So it's more of the green flag is, as a leader or as a new leader stepping into that space, these are some of the questions and some of the mindsets that you need to have, okay? And that's a lot around asking better questions. And we'll jump into what that actually looks like over the course of the next 15, 20 minutes. Building ownership. So making sure that you're not just there as a rescuer for your individuals, or a hero, as the title is, that you're really helping them to own that process, that procedure, because it will set them up for success, okay? Develops thinking, so that's crucial. So you want your group or the team that you manage to have critical thinking skills, but you want them to be accountable and independent, and you also want them to bring ideas, suggestions, solutions, challenges to the table. So the more space you give them to ask them to step into that space, the more that kind of mindset is being used. So that's creating then a great culture. If you're into reading, Gary Ridge, who was the CEO of WD-40, he changed his whole culture organization from a management point of view into a coaching model. And he asked managers to really focus on the coaching element and not just the results or the impact or the KPIs. And you might think that's not unusual, but it can be when you work in a fast-paced environment where our focus is our results. So he was very much like, even if it's time constraints, we should be looking at the coaching piece. So, because unfortunately at times when you're in a pressurized environment and maybe there's a deadline or a time that needs to be met, sometimes the coaching model can be forgotten for just getting the results and getting it, which you might hear some language like getting it over the line. Getting it over the line can have different connotations, but it can generally mean let's do what we need to do to get to where we need to get to, but we're not necessarily learning in that moment. We might reflect later on, but we're not giving the space and the time to learn in that moment. And that takes time, and that takes a lot of self-awareness, but it takes a lot of confidence as well from leadership to also push back on senior leadership or a business model. Okay. And obviously, all those factors together will bring great trust as we go along. So keep that in mind as we move forward, that the goal is not to be the hero. The goal is to help others become their best. So I'm just going to look through the chat for one moment. So what questions would you ask? Do you mean as a leader, Adele, to your team, and when they come to you with some questions, or is there a different context? I will talk in the last 2 or 3 slides around some of the questions that we can ask individuals. But if you want to just clarify that, I'm more than happy to step into that question as well. So while I'm waiting there for you, maybe I'll just move on to our next slide and some of the things that I would like us to focus on today. And one of them is a coaching model that, from my experience over the last 3 or 4 years being coached and also being a coachee, is there's great models and frameworks out there, but at times I became quite overwhelmed with all the different models and frameworks. So I sat down and I created what I call the clarity framework, and I use this with a lot of new leaders, and it just brings them through some kind of touch points when these situations occur, when they feel overwhelmed or when they have challenges or when they're not sure what to do next. So I'm going to take you through quickly the clarity framework, but before that, I see Adele has come back. So she asked, what questions would you ask as a coach, or as a coaching leader? So some of the questions that we'll do is we'll step into Michael Bungay Stanier's 7 models, but he talks about 7 questions. But the one question that he talks about is, what's the real challenge for you? And that's a great question to ask anybody or any team member, to really get under the hood of what is the concern here, what is the real challenge. And by understanding what that is, you can really break it down to helping them to create clarity, to really identify some of those root causes, but then allow them to grow and develop and to find some of those answers to some of the questions that they have. Because, in those situations, they may not be the expert of themselves in the role, but they are the expert of the knowledge and the role to a degree. So we want to ask them questions of how they would handle A, B, or C. Another great one is if you do kind of go into the 7 levels of the deep model, but one of the questions that Michael asks is, and what else? And I use that a lot. And they call it a lazy question because it's very much, if somebody has a concern or a question and they come to a leader and you ask them, like, what is the real challenge here? And you kind of get through some of the main concerns and the main points. And then you ask, what else? And then they elaborate further. So you're peeling back the onion again. And then again, you ask them, what else? Till you get to the core of some of the issues in hand. And some of them can be uncertainty, fear of giving the wrong answers, etc., etc. So as a leader, we want to understand their people first, to understand how they like to work and how they like to engage. So that's why I always say, when you do step into leadership, to make sure that you meet with your team initially, set down your leadership style, what that looks like, but then ask them, how do they like to be managed, right? There is going to be certain times that the business needs outweighs maybe some of the way they like to be managed. If they have to work 9 to 5 and there's not much flexibility in that, then that's 9 to 5. If they have to have their break from 1 to 2, these are all part of the structure of working in a business environment. But you can have them human conversations about, okay, do you like to have feedback live? Do you like to have feedback in person? Do you like to have feedback over Slack? So you need to look at all the different generations you're working with and really sit down and understand who they are. Also talk about the things that you will bring to the table. So if there is difficult feedback that you're, as a coach, the best thing to do is deliver in person and try to deliver it in the moment or after the moment, so you can work then on a plan to move forward. So just keep that in mind as we move forward as well then. But we'll touch on some of those questions, Adele, as we get to the end of our session. So I want to see, Donna has a question. Do you ever create your own bespoke frameworks for individual leaders to incorporate diversity? We can do, yes. So we can look at different models, different situations, what is happening, what's the diversity policy or the diversity culture within that particular environment. But then also that individual, like if that individual considers themselves to be an introvert or an extrovert, then we'd look at the different elements of that. We would challenge that also. So that's, as a coach, if somebody was coming to me as somebody who was struggling moving into leadership, the first protocol is always to look at themselves first, right? So it's about the self-awareness. So we would sit down and we would do different conversations around your values, what you see, how you see yourself, how do others perceive you, or how do you feel they perceive you. And then we would build out a structure around the clarity framework is something that I would invite into the conversation and see how they feel about walking through that. And then there may be sections within the clarity framework that they want to hone in on further. But then there's other models that we might use, such as GROW, and there's a number of different models out there based on the situation as well. So sometimes when people move into leadership, it cannot just be about, some of them can be great people persons, but they may not have great organization skills. They may struggle with work-life balance, etc. So it's very individual when it comes to a leader, but at the same time, I think foundations and the bricks for those need to be laid. And I think that's where corporations and companies have an obligation to give that training initially about what that looks like, how you support yourself to support others, etc. So, Donna, I hope that helps answer some of that question. But if I just walk through the clarity section quite quickly and framework, and then we'll bring us back to the last slide where we can kind of deep dive into some of those question frameworks that we discussed from the very beginning. But the clarity framework, I just invite our new leaders to step into it because it really helps them to kind of break down some of their thought patterns, maybe some of the things they're feeling overwhelmed with, some of the difficulties and some of the challenges, okay? So the first one is curiosity before control. We're probably more comfortable with the control. So if we feel like we're in control, then we feel like we can manage or we can lead better, but that's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes we need to really lean into what we can control and control the controllables. Because there will be a lot of times, especially in leadership, where you won't know or have the answers, and you shouldn't have the answers to everything. And you might have to kind of navigate uncertainty or navigate ambiguity. But your job as a leader is to bring those individuals along on that journey, to be transparent, but to be curious, right? Even as a leader, we continuously have to be curious. We have to still ask those questions. We still have to ask the individual their point of view. Why would they think or say what they say? Why are they feeling the way they're feeling? What is it that's causing them concerns, causing them challenges, causing them could be opportunities. So somebody could be very eager about progressing and you want to kind of talk to them through what that actually looks like. So the first part of the clarity framework is just that curiosity piece over control. Then the second piece as a leader, and it's super important, and our deep listening skills is listening with intent, right? So we need to, as humans, it can be quite difficult. Sometimes we listen to reply, but we really need to listen to understand when we become a leader, because a lot of times the answer is under the hood. So it's not what's being said that I kind of listen out for. And then we would ask questions and challenge that as well as we move into kind of understanding what the real concern for the individuals are. Second piece is awareness of self and others. So that's crucial as you move into leadership. And a lot of people will, if they haven't, will start working on themselves. Some may have already been through coaching before, through different programs for leadership. A lot of leaders will have mentors. I have a number of mentors that I work with to get different perspectives. And that's key as you move through, because as I said, being in leadership can be a lonely place. Sometimes you're making the decisions that people aren't happy with or not really buy along with. And what can be really challenging for new leaders is you could be moving into managing a team that you were peers with. And that can be really challenging. And a lot of new leaders don't understand or don't really grasp the gravity of that sometimes when they move in, because you will be challenged. And from my own personal experience, it's something that occurred for myself moving into a leadership role, managing the people that I would have been peers with previously. It takes Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of character, and it takes a lot of you asking kind of them challenging questions, and but bringing them on a journey with you, right? And that's where your human skills come in really important. That relationship building, that empathy, that compassion. Okay. And then I know we talked about in session one, we talked a little bit about reflection and responding. So similar in the clarity framework, we look at the reflection piece. Okay, so reflection before reaction. So we want to understand why somebody is saying something. So when I was a leader, there was a lot of times where people would have been emotional, either angry or sad or crying, etc., etc. I tried to not look at the reaction. I try to get under, well, why, what is making them feel this way, and how can we help them to the support that they need to make the right decisions, to be supportive in their role, and to give their best every day. So I try to reflect on what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, and not just being defensive or jumping to conclusions or making assumptions. That's not my role as a leader. My role as a leader is to really understand what difficulties that person is going through, and is there anything that's potentially outside of work that is really impacting. Because when you're in work, you're not just a work ed, you're bringing everything in, and life gets messy. And we need to understand as leaders that you need to have the emotional intelligence to understand when that might be the case. It also, it's a balancing act, because you don't want to pry or ask too many personal questions, because it's really up to the individual what comfortable they're sharing with. But you do need to create that space to allow them, if they wanted, to step into it. So I always say invite people to have that conversation. If they decide to decline on that, then that's fine. You don't push it any further. But if they do say they need extra support, then that's your job as a leader to help them with that as well. Some of the other things we would look at is the influence through conversations. So that's a big part. As a leader, they will look at your words. Okay. Trust over dependency, and your leadership style or identity. So that's something you will start growing. It won't happen in the first day, probably won't happen in the first 6 to 9 months. Be kind to yourself as you go through that, but you will find your leadership style as you move forward. And there's different types of leadership styles. Okay, I'm going to just jump into the last slide, and then I'll take, I know there's a couple of questions outstanding, but I will take those then at the very end. So as you said, today's session is to really look at also Michael Bungay Stanier's coaching habits and his 7 questions. But the question I really like to step into is this question that can change everything, right? So here's what you should do. So that's something we don't or should not step into it as a leader, and because we're giving the answer, then we're taking the accountability, we're taking the influence, and we're taking the empowerment away from that individual. We should always ask, well, what's the real challenge here for you? And as I said, what might come out of that question can be sometimes uncomfortable for you as a leader as well, because it may not have anything to do with the situation at work, and maybe something outside of work. But that's our role as a leader, to care for our individuals, and we want to help them to grow and develop. And we have support then as well in the background to manage our well-being, because it's a two-way street. But we should really be looking at, well, what's the real challenge for you? And it may not always be a work-life balance situation. It could be something else. Somebody could be hurting because they never got a promotion. They could be having a disagreement with somebody in work. So we want to get under the hood. Or they may be, when you kind of get really into some of the conversations, they may just be lacking the confidence. And sometimes lacking the confidence can make you kind of not really address some of the questions. So that's a real great question. And Michael calls it the focus question. Again, if you look at the coaching habit, really step into that. And the other question I like is his awe question, which we talked about, and what else, right? And one other question he brings in is the foundation question: what do you want? And that's really good for clarifying the needs and the expectations. So you're clear and you're on the same page, and it creates better alignment. So leadership isn't about having a little bit of a slaying here. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating the conditions, or what we call the space, for better thinking. So the 30 minutes in these situations always go really quick. So, coming to the end of our 30-minute live session. but I do have a couple of outstanding questions here. I'm more than happy to step into them. And again, I can step into other questions as we go offline as well and make sure they're shared with Paul. And if people are interested in the slides, I'll share them. So J.A. Fletcher, good to meet you again. He asked a question here. Hi, Ed. How important do you feel the role of mentoring is, both as a mentee to junior colleagues and learning from senior leaders being mentored? Jay, I think you probably would have heard me talk about that. I'm a real advocate for mentoring. If you listen to some of my other talks, or if you look at my LinkedIn or my Instagram reels, I think mentoring is key. I'm also really an advocate for reverse mentoring, and I do a lot of that where I work with either teenagers or people in their early careers, because I can help learn and grow and understand their challenges. But having a mentor who walks beside you, so that's the difference between coaching and mentoring. Coaching is that, as we all know, we ask powerful questions because the individual has the answers within them and they're the expert on themselves, but they need to create a space. While mentoring, there's elements of that, but we also walk hand by hand with the individual through certain questions, through certain situations. So if you do ever do a coaching session with me, or if I'm in the university working with students, one of the big things I always tell them is to get a mentor and to get different mentors. So one thing I would always say is, if you work in customer support, in business, etc., find a mentor that maybe does not work in customer support, because they might have the same train of thought of you. They might be confirmation biases in there. I would, and I have sourced mentors who are in engineering, accountancy, etc., because they would think very different to me. And that's what I'd love. I'd love that other perspective and that other challenge. And then Donna, I hope that answers, Jay. If there's anything else, just let me know. And then Donna, agree, moving up the ranks can be very difficult, and one has to remain calm, professional, and ethical, of course. Yeah, 100%. We all try to do our best. You will make mistakes. Allow yourself to make mistakes, okay? That's how we grow. That's how we develop. Making mistakes and you reflect on them helps you to become that better individual. And obviously, as you mentioned there, being professional is the key through all of this. So always remain calm. Make sure that you're helping to support yourself. If you need additional supports, don't be afraid to ask for them. We're here always to help other people grow and develop, but also your leader is there for you to succeed, right? They don't want to see you to fail. So make sure that you're asking those questions as you move forward. Okay, I know I'm slightly over time and we have other sessions coming up, but it was such a joy. I don't see any other questions in the box. So what I'll say also, and I'll leave leaders and new leaders and people who are contemplating stepping into leadership, it's a great profession. For me, it helped me to grow and develop, really helped me to see things differently. It's constantly learning as you move forward, but also it is fun, right? You're dealing with great humans. You get to see their personal growth and their personal development. And as a leader, I say this a lot of the times, I'll speak for myself. My ultimate mission and ultimate goal will be somebody that I'm helping to lead or to manage or to grow and develop, that someday that they will be leading me, because that's the ultimate compliment, right? That somebody who you've helped grow is now being in that position to lead you. Okay. So I'll leave you with that. It was great to connect. Stay on Coaching Minds. You'll see my link up the top. If you want to connect, want to have further the conversation, let me know. But until next time, stay safe and we'll catch you soon. Take care.